You got to turn in what you have. Exactly. We call it deadline style. You don't turn it in because it's perfect. You turn it in because the deadline has come. All right. And then if you want to make it perfect, you work beyond the deadline and you have all semester to improve it. So there are little things I don't like how arbitrary the edge of those wings are. So how would I change that? Well, I can always cut my own shape, right? So instead of letting it be cut off for me by the edge of the paper, I can draw my own shape to cut it out, right? And that feels a little bit more intentional. I don't like how the wings here are overlapping the foot, so I can roughly cut that out. But remember, I can only affect the layer that I have selected. I want to empty everything out that's behind the centaur tail. So I'm going to select the inside of the centaur tail right there. And then I'm going to delete that selection across all the other layers. And you see it empties it out so that that tail pops out. And I could do that almost arbitrarily anywhere. One of my favorite techniques, so this is a little technical, is to find a layer that has contained shapes. So what are contained shapes? They are shapes that don't have any openings. So like the empty white space within these strands of hair, like that strand of hair, that strand of hair, that strand of hair, and this lion's mane, those are contained. So on that layer, which is this one, I'm going to use my magic wand. And I've used this before to select all the whites and delete them, right? But I can also use this with the same settings to select the empty space. And instead of it being contiguous being unchecked, which will select all of the empty space on the whole layer, I'm going to check contiguous, and that's going to mean it selects the empty space as long as they're touching with where I click. So that will give me these contained shapes. Contained right there. And if I hold down Shift, I can add to it. So I can do multiples of these selections. Where's some other contained shapes? These. Now, why am I making such a big deal about contained shapes? Like the lips here, those are contained. Because if I click somewhere that's not contained, that's open, like this, it will just select everything. Right? Because that's all touching. But if I turn off the eyeball, you can see all those selections I have that are these nice little discrete connected shapes. Maybe I can get a bigger one somewhere. I can gamble on this leg. Hold down Shift. Yeah, it looks like that's, looks like that is contained, right? Okay, now I'm going to take those and I'm going to delete them from these other layers. So every time I select the layer and delete, it's going to reveal those shapes. You see how those parts of the mane and stuff are now, like in the hoof here, they're all getting clarified and deleted. So that even through all 5 of my layers, you'll see those strands clearly. You'll see the lips clearly, right? You'll see the hoof clearly. So that's a fun kind of technical way to clarify your composite. The last thing I don't like is this arbitrary shape here. So first I find what layer that's on. And it's not too hard with 5 layers, right? And then I can grab it, and this is modifying within the layer. I can just grab that. And instead of deleting it, which would just get rid of it, right? Which isn't bad. That's actually kind of interesting. But I also have the option of moving it. So when you make a selection and then you move it, it will actually cut that selection out. It's still in the same layer, but now it is moving arbitrarily and separately from the other pixels in that layer. I can also, while it's selected, Option Command T and transform it like it's its own layer and then move it somewhere else. But because it's not its own layer, if I overlap these pixels with pixels that are in the same layer, these will overtake those pixels, right? They will replace them. So there you go. So now this layer, which had that big chunk up in this corner, now has it down there. And I'm not sure why that's, oh, that selection is still active. So then I hit Command D, and you can see it. And I kind of like what that does. All right. And now kind of last thing, just arbitrarily, I'm going to take a chunk out of here and delete it from a few layers just to, because it's a little too dense. There we go. And then I think I'm done. This is what's called a dynamic composition. It's meant to move the eye at speed. So there's a lot of diagonals and a lot of curves. And it's not central symmetrical. You know, it's not balanced off of the middle. It's kind of tilted. There's not a lot of verticals or horizontals. We're going to talk about different approaches of design throughout the semester. Yours does not need to be dynamic, right? It's just something I like. You might balance yours all very symmetrically off of the center. But what is nice is that I'm avoiding the edges of the frame so that I'm making all my own decisions. So how do I save this? Well, first, you can always go to File, Save, or Command S for short. And that's going to update the file wherever you opened it from. So I opened it from my folder. So this file, if you remember I had a green dot when I started, I'm going to give it a green dot again. Each time I update it, that green dot will disappear. That's just something Photopea does. And it lets me know, oh, okay, I've updated that file. If you say File, Save As, instead of just Save, then it will save it again, right? With either a new name or in a new place. So once you've saved as once your file is named with your name and a description, all you have to do to keep saving it and updating it is hit Command S or File Save. But at this point, we're finished with our PSD file. So let's organize it a little bit. Our PSD file has all of our layers. So I'm going to make a new folder that's called Reference Images. And I'm going to put all of these. I did way more than 5, but I didn't use all of them, right? But maybe I'll use them later, or if I ever wanted to make changes or do another composition with this Greek mythology line art, it's all right in there, my reference images. And sometimes I'll mark that as red. But this is the file that matters. But what I cannot do with that file is turn it into Canvas. Because this is what's called a working format. It supports multiple layers. It's a lot. The file size on this, if you right-click and say Get Info, is 45 megabytes. That's longer than a whole novel as a Word document, right? And that's just because there's a lot of pixels here across the multiple layers. And I cannot put a document that is 45 megabytes into Canvas. I want to keep it to more about 5 megabytes. And PSD files are not supported by Canvas. You need to do what's called an online format. An online format does not support layers. So it's going to flatten your image into one grid of pixels. So when you are ready to save it, we do not actually need to do the flatten image, but we need to save it as an online file type, such as a JPEG. And to show you some of these options and get us used to it early on, I'm going to open from Photopea. There we are. And I'm going to say File, not Save As, but Export As. Right? And if I'm in Photoshop, I'm going to do Save a Copy and not Save, or Save As So in Photoshop, it's save a copy under File. In Photopea, it's export as. And that allows you to choose online formats. And we see a lot of them. The ones we're going to learn in class are PNG, JPEG, and GIF. Right? So let's first save it as a JPEG, because that's what's in the instructions. JPEG is the most common image online. Why is it so common? Because you get to control the amount of data it takes up. It's what's called a loss compression. And 70, which is the default, is just fine. Right? And then, where did it save? It didn't save to my folder. So where do things save when you download them from the internet? To our downloads folder. So you need to find it in downloads. It will have the same name, but it will have a different digital format tag, which is JPEG. And then I mark those orange. The size of this image, even though it looks the same, is only 1.7 megabytes. So we went from 40 something to 1. That's the power of these compression online formats. Now I'm going to do another thing. I'm going to turn off the background. And because I took the effort, which is kind of optional, not required, to delete all the white pixels from the other layers, instead of just having them in multiply mode, I can save it now when the background's turned off, and it will support that transparency, which means it will only have black pixels. But it will only work if I do that as not a JPEG, because a JPEG has to be a solid grid of pixels. So if I save this again as a JPEG, it will fill all those empty pixels with white. But if I save it as a PNG, which is a slightly newer online format than JPEG, it will support transparency. This is perfect for things like logos that you're putting online, so that the background of the website can come through the logo, so your logo doesn't have to be contained by a white rectangle. And maybe you were in a classroom growing up where someone had a really, really cheap t-shirt design, right? Where it was like a red t-shirt, but the design was a white rectangle with the design on the white rectangle, right? Instead of just the image floating with the red coming through of the t-shirt. That's the difference between a JPEG and a PNG. So if I save this as a PNG, you can see the only thing that's different, and I'll find it in downloads. And it's not a bad idea to save it as both types, though you're only going to put one to Canvas. I'm going to mark that as orange, because that's also an online file type. But if I open them in preview, you'll see the difference. So I double-click the JPEG, you can see the white background. I double-click the PNG, you see a gray background. And every once in a while, you're going to see little artifacts of other pixels, which are still part of my image. And in the finishing, I'll show you how I can clean that up. But this is free floating, right? And just preview uses middle gray as the default background. Okay, but let's get the requirements posted. So I go to exercise 1, where you post it, under assignments. I scroll down to one I've started, and if I haven't started one, I hit reply, and I'm going to post it. The first thing you post is your name, your first name that you're called, and then your last name is registered. And then I want you to do a dash, and then I want you to put the theme, right? Whatever you used, whether it was a banned book, whether it was a comic strip, whether it was characters, a cartoon, and mine was Greek mythology. Then you hit return, so that it shows up not next to your name, but underneath your name. And then you're going to drag down either your PNG or a JPEG. Because Canvas has a white background, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to use my PNG, even though it's a little bit bigger. The JPEG was like 1 megabyte. This one is 4.7. But as long as it's under 5, that's pretty good. But now I need to shrink it so it fits cleanly. And I want it to be at least double the size of my name, maybe even quadruple the size of my name, so that it goes nicely with that, with my name and the theme. And then I hit reply. To change the size, you click on it till you see these transform anchor points, and then you just drag it out from the corner. You can do a JPEG or a PNG. Notice, this is the only time you'll see the difference. You see